Welcome to Attention Retention with Jackie McManus, your source for the latest trends in transportation recruitment and retention.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Attention Retention. I'm Jackie McManus, CEO and founder of KJ Media. We are a recruitment advertising agency specializing in talent attraction, optimizing hiring processes, and driving efficiency to help grow our workforce in the trucking industry. On this show, we dive into the world of recruitment, retention, and recognition by interviewing industry leaders and experts as we unpack strategies, challenges, and successes surrounding these three critical aspects of workforce management. And this week, I am so excited to be joined by Michael Blair, Director of Recruiting at Anderson Leasing at Bay Transportation. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so impressed by Bay's impressive growth. It really highlights a strong team, leadership, and really, when you look at it, recruitment and retention strategies. And so, as a Minnesota-based company, family-owned, you guys really treat your drivers like family, team members, and offering career growth opportunities, focusing on hiring the right people. We've talked quite a bit about that. And I want to just give the company's mission statement a highlight, which I really, truly just personally love. And I'm just going to quote it. Okay. The Bay's mission statement is, we exist to help our customers get their products to those who need them. We matter to each other, to our customers, and to the U.S. economy. This mission just resonates with me because it underscores the vital role that transportation plays in keeping our economy moving and making sure our communities have access to the goods they need.
Yes.
Before we dive into the 3 R's of recruitment, retention, and recognition, could you walk us through your journey in becoming a director at Bay Transportation?
Yeah. So I started out, actually used to work for a research company prior to trucking. Like a lot of people and most that are in trucking, I found myself in it randomly. Took a job working for a recruiting company for quite a few years, and then did some contract work actually at Bay. Coming up now on about 8 years ago. So it's been a journey, and reached out to Sam, the owner, at a time when I was looking for a different employment opportunity, and he had a fit. So we met again, and since then it's been a little over 4 years. I had the luxury of starting 3 weeks before COVID, so that was a different journey in itself. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I've been in recruiting and leasing and dabbled in operations and safety and some other pieces of the business. So it's been fun, and it's I think what's nice about this industry is you don't watch the clock. So the end of, unless you're in planning or operations, you might, but in my world, you don't watch the clock, and that's always nice. So
I think that's exactly it. Like you said, many of us find us in this industry by accident, by blessing, however you want to look at it, and get bit by the bug, right?
Yep.
Growing up, I don't have family in the trucking industry or friends that were part of it at the time, and I started working in the industry at 21, and now definitely more than a decade later, I could just say that it's something that we're extremely passionate about, right? And I think it is because it's so fast at pace, and more importantly, tying it back to really being part of helping the U.S. economy move and deliver the goods. And that's why the mission statement from Sam really just resonated with me. And I'm so excited to have you on and really dive into recruitment specifically, because that was a big piece of your background. And so, when we look at the overall landscape, and what would you say are some of the more successful approaches in today's market, and that's been evolving, of course, to attracting and recruiting talent that meet your hiring requirements?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece is just finding, in our industry, it's really finding the right people. Not only drivers, but people to represent your company. And I think I was fortunate in joining here at Bay is a big thing. Obviously, is going to be pay, right? That's obviously paying home time or two, generally your top things that drivers are looking for. Another benefit we have is equipment. When it comes to trucks and trailers, all of our equipment is average is about 2.5 years old, which is, I'm very fortunate to have that from a recruiting
Yeah.
aspect. So those are kind of your bigger pieces. Advertising and recruitment strategies, it's really, everybody has a different formula. A lot of it's based on kind of your freight networks and things like that, like what works for you. There's areas where you can be really competitive based on your freight, and there's areas where you kind of know in recruiting that you're not going to have as much effect. So it's just kind of using your formula and really refining it as you kind of move along and continuing that refinement. That helps, I think, from my level, to make sure you're driving results.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And when we connected and we started speaking, obviously we have staffing, both of us in our blood. So
Yeah.
um, there's something unique about coming from that background, right? It's about
Yeah.
training, it's KPIs, it's driving forward. Really,
Yep.
you know, there's definitely a passive approach, right, in keeping lead
Yeah.
nurtured, but it's pretty aggressive when we look at it. And the scale that B&B has grown over the years with the team they have in place, I have to say, is really impressive. Could you talk around, leading that department? What you
Yeah.
found to be successful in leading, managing the team. Obviously, comes down to hiring the right people, but
Yeah.
what would you say as some words of advice for someone that just took that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is really, I mean, at the end of the day, you got to lay out what your vision is, and I think your team understanding that's first and foremost. The big thing I would say is finding people who are just personally accountable, because at the end of the day, I mean, I can lay out a plan and I can make the right hire what I feel. But that personal accountability piece is very key. So, I mean, to me, it's kind of those questions that, a recruiter asks himself, what can I do to help? How can I assist with, whether it be with a driver in recruiting? But then it's kind of always getting back to that action plan. So I think that's the biggest strategy for me is finding the right people. I do a lot of my hires historically through referrals. And I think that's key because at the end of the day, yes, they're here to work for you and they respect you and maybe like you as a boss. But then they have another connection too that, hey, I had a friend who referred me here and there's a relationship there that they want to uphold too. So
And that makes sense. I think I really like the personally accountable for what they do because
yeah,
that those two words really open up the different.
yeah,
Are they proactive? Are they going to jump in? And with trucking, the job description, you often go outside of the job description. Let's just say that.
yeah. A lot of places do. Yeah, I call it kind of industry. In this industry, sometimes there's a little overselling, and I think there's a lot to be said about that in recruiting in general, whether it's in trucking or whatever it may be. And I think there's an honesty piece that you can't teach. As a person, you have it, and some that don't. And I think quality people and quality drivers can sense that pretty quickly too.
Absolutely, especially within the first conversation with a
Yes.
driver and a recruiter. And I know for my agency, that is a big piece. A lot of the other soft skills are trainable, right?
Yes.
But the
Yep.
honesty and that personal accountability, I couldn't agree with you more. What would you say are the biggest challenges right now that recruiters are facing, from where you sit, whether internal
Yeah.
or from, the bird's eye view?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would say the one we're seeing probably the most is kind of the industry overselling right now. So really, realistically, a lot of carriers are dealing with the same issues. And generally you do, right? Right now with freight and rates where they're at,
Yeah.
kind of those non-controllables, we're all dealing with that.
Yeah.
And we're all hoping for, obviously a change in the next quarter, 2 quarters, whatever it may be. Nobody has that nailed down. But that's for me is kind of the biggest piece is just when you're recruiting a driver or once you have them in your seat, it's just kind of helping them to understand where the economy's at. Historically trucking is always a little bit ahead. So it's really helping them kind of understand that because we have, I mean, for us, we're fortunate. We have a lot of people who may leave that end up coming back. And in this industry, it's very normal that recruiters tell you kind of what you want to hear. And for us, I mean, we turn down a lot of drivers or we'll really persuade drivers not to join just based on, hey, we're not a good fit because what you need, we can't deliver.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously ties organically right back to retention too. But I would say that's probably the biggest thing right now. The other piece too is a lot of companies are struggling. So you're right now a lot of the schools in the industry companies have kind of closed down or separated, so you don't have generally that same driver pool or the size of the pool that you're used to. So right now, a lot of companies are really just kind of going back to the well, and they're hiring drivers they've had before, or they're hiring drivers from a carrier that maybe had them for 6 months, and that's normal, but it's emphasized in this kind of market. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that's a really big important piece is as a recruiter's talking to a driver, everyone has different needs, right?
yeah,
So even if, the pay falls in line, but maybe the home time doesn't. They
yes,
want to be home more. They want to, go to the soccer games, the little league
yep,
games, or spend time.
understandable. Yeah,
And it's all understandable. That's one thing we talk about often with trucking companies is just have that honest conversation.
yes,
There's been periods within our industry, as we know, that rapid growth. So a lot of folks were just getting bodies and seats to get the
yes,
freight to move. Where this is an opportunity, I think. Obviously we want the market to be better fiscally,
yeah,
and for so many reasons.
yes,
But this is an opportunity to look at, okay, what's going well, um, what drivers are kind of on the fence, right? Or maybe their
yes,
safety rating is not that great, and there's higher variables there for them to get in an accident. How
yes,
do we have more of that better conversation in the beginning, and how do we leverage what we're currently doing to gain more efficiencies? Sometimes
yeah,
industry that's often we're running 24/7.
yes,
It's really hard to take a breath and look at it, that 30,000 foot view that I always suggest. This is, as much as we want things to restore, and they will at some point, this is a great opportunity to really look at what's working, what's not working, and how can we have better conversations in the beginning that lead
yeah.
to better retention in the long run.
Yeah, I think I think as a lot of companies, a lot of your larger carriers have been refined over years and years. And for us too, we were a larger van carrier transition to reefer. So part of it at this time is you're always going through a refining process, and I think, like you mentioned, getting up to breathe sometimes is difficult.
Yeah.
In this industry, it's not a norm. So for us, it's really just continually refining. And at the end of the day, you're trying to improve yourself, and that when that happens, you generally improve the business too. So, and that kind of ironically comes back to that personal accountability piece. So that's why I hold that so high. And it kind of ties into everything with recruiting and transparency. But it's nice when you have a driver who comes on and maybe they have a rough first week or even a first month, and they have somebody that they do have a connection with that they can come to and ask for simple advice or just have an ear for somebody to listen to. And that for us is very key. So our recruiters do try and do a good job just kind of keeping in contact, or if they reach out naturally, they will help with that retention piece. But in this industry, it's so much, you're here's 1 week and then the next week you're already onto it. And I don't like that part of the industry because I think that's where you see some of these cycles of turnover and the increases, and generally not a lot of decreases. And it's just been easier for companies historically to hire more. So I think this was a good time in our market where the last few years you've seen an increase with an ability to hire. During COVID, there was that option where, hey, you could go out and get more trucks and you could hire.
Yeah.
And then now there's been a little bit of a pause where carriers have to become a little more nimble and utilize their resources better and their people better. So to take I would say a good thing out of a bad thing, that's kind of where you have to be right now. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And talking about the recruiting piece,
yeah,
honesty, transparency, it's absolutely critical. Um, and bottom line, even with the market where it is right now, it's highly competitive.
yeah,
And that's obviously going to only increase as time goes on. And not
yes,
only in existing our industry, we're competing with outside industries, right?
yes,
So,
yes,
and that's why we have this podcast, is to talk about the industry and how companies can, elevate and let drivers know about the companies out there that are really working to have that honest, transparent relationship. But with that said, with so many options out there for drivers,
yeah.
um, how do you go about differentiating yourself
Yeah, so I mean, I was fortunate when I worked in like a third party recruiting world. I was fortunate to kind of see the pros and cons of a lot of carriers,
Mm-hmm.
and then everybody has their goods, their bads, and their uglies, and a lot of it is, for me anyway, is just kind of making sure they see your goods, but also exposing them to some things maybe where you're a little weak, because
Mm-hmm.
generally they're not going to get that feedback. And that again is back to the transparency and truthfulness part. So that for me is kind of the key. And again, every carrier is a little different with that. To me, if you understand the costs and turnover, it's a pretty large cost. So if you
Sure.
can trim your turnover by 30%, you're talking a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on your size, into the millions of dollars, right?
Millions.
So,
Oh yeah.
um,
Mm-hmm. Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, that's the biggest thing I would say.
Hmm. I love the good, the bads, the ugly. I say that often, right? Because you know, if you look at it from competitor to competitor, pay it's we're talking sometimes pennies on the dollar, right?
Yes. Yep.
Home time is out of control. That's the relationship between the carrier and the
Yeah.
shipper, right? So, when you look at it, it's okay. This is what's going well. These are maybe some concerns drivers do have, but want to be upfront about it from the beginning. It
Yep.
just automatically puts their guard down, right? Psychology 101. They're understanding the full scope of what you guys do so that
Yeah.
there's no surprises in the long run when it comes down to turnover and retention. Now, things happen, of course, but I think
They
it's an
do.
incredible opportunity for recruiting teams to really work with drivers on the front end and then
Yeah.
streamline that to operations.
Yeah. And I think it's hard. Sometimes I think it's hard just staying proactive for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of the day, we look at a lot of spreadsheets, you look at a lot of numbers, but we've always tried to be proactive. Obviously, with our equipment is first and foremost, and our drivers and their safety. But our pay, I would say, has always been pretty proactive,
Yeah.
and that's really key. I mean, so the big thing you have to understand is, are you competitive, and are you competitive out in Philadelphia if you're running a regional? Are you competitive in the Midwest? Those markets are different,
Hmm.
so you really have to understand that, and you need the leniency from generally ownership to be able to make those changes and get the support, because that does drive results.
Hmm. And I love that you said that because with competitive targeting, a big piece that we always recommend is, look at the pay and how that's competitive, but then
Yeah.
target drivers that your company has the value proposition there, right?
Yes.
And be able to speak to that, not just what your company does, but be able to speak about the benefits of your company versus XYZ
Yes.
company. Especially if your company requires 2 years of experience, which is, industry norm for CDL A drivers. Focus on those feeder schools. Focus on the
Yeah.
companies that are taking the new grads. There's going to be a value proposition there. So
Yes.
that's like a different lens, but it's also training the team internally on how to go about doing that,
It
right?
is. Yeah. I might have to hire you. Watch out. Jeez.
Well, I'm open. But let's talk about retention. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about the front end. We're talking about, hey, how do we, better conversations
Yeah.
to lead to better retention? What have you found to be some more approaches that have been successful in retaining your workforce over time?
Yeah. I mean, again, it starts on kind of the front end. I think for us, it's kind of, there's an expectations exchange, that I think marries right away well.
Hmm. Yep.
After the fact, when they're seated, it's really kind of holding both parties to those expectations, right? And if there's something you can do more, you can shift. Like for us, I would say the last probably 8 to 12 months has really just been a shift to pushing miles.
Yep.
A lot of companies have went down the same path. I mean, you can control miles, but you can't always control rate. So that's the big thing for us, is pushing the miles. But really, first and foremost, it's always just that communication piece. I think in this industry, you're expected to deliver on time.
Hmm.
If a driver delivers on time, they don't get a thank you for delivering on time. That was the expectation. So I think sometimes just something as simple as that is, hey, you had a really tight run and you made it. Thank you. Because most of their calls are the other end of it, where it's,
Yeah.
you weren't on time, you didn't utilize your hours of service, and I don't think everybody does a great job in the industry kind of understanding, well, what caused it for the driver. Yeah, we know they made the mistake, but really, if you can get down to what caused it and help them see it, that's what you need to hammer out. The actual item you called them for generally wasn't what the issue was. It was caused by something, So for us, that's has been an emphasis. So like we've had like leadership training and just working with a lot of our internal folks on, I would say, everything from empathy just to coaching, and how that affects the driver. And what I think is unique about that in this market, most carriers, generally those training programs are something that's gone first because of the cost. To a bottom line, it costs money, but for us, it's an investment that we've made. So
I think that's a really smart move because empathy, those are real soft core values,
yes,
right? And we're typically a hardcore industry, pretty black and white,
yeah,
say how we see it. Um, but over time, that does go a really long way, right? So there
yeah,
might be an initial front, but if you're training the internal staff how to, just think a driver in the long run, that's going to save. We tie that back to what we were originally saying,
yes,
the dollars. That's going to save quite a bit of money just
yes,
for
yep,
the team. Would you say, and I love that you just said thank you, right? Like the power of those two words really,
yeah,
really, really go a long way. I know when I often talk to drivers, and the reason they stay with companies is because the leadership team or ownership acknowledges
yes,
them, thanks them.
yeah,
We're in trucking, things happen outside of our control. So having a team that supports you, acknowledges if all is going well, absolutely, because 90% of the time they're getting honked at,
yeah,
the cars aren't too nice, right? So how
yeah.
can
They
you put a little bit of light in their day?
their office is a lot different than ours.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I mean, some of the other tools that I think that we've utilized well is just really diversifying. Getting opportunities for drivers to get into a dedicated role or a regional opportunity. And the big thing there is the consistency. Obviously, pay, miles, home time for the driver is very, very key. And some companies, had shifted before, and some haven't. And we had those opportunities, and we just emphasized them and essentially created more, which is great. But we use some internal platforms too, that I think is really important to get driver feedback direct to management. And I think that goes a long way because we get them every day. And some of them, there's ones you can assist on right away and it's immediate, and there's others you need to work on internally to be able to help fix maybe the situation that they're in, or something that they're dealing with. But I think at our size, it's a benefit, because they can get help quicker. And as you grow, and companies go through this all the time, that changes and that relationship changes. So there's something to be said about that too, I think. So
Yeah, the feedback loop is tremendous across the board, right? People, bottom line, psychology 101, they want to feel valued, they want to feel heard.
yeah,
And oftentimes, folks will say, well, I don't know if I can do anything about that right now. That's okay,
yeah,
right? I
yes,
think bottom line is giving them a space to discuss what's going on with them. And of course, nothing changes, like, it's not a flip of the switch, right? But let them know, hey, we got your feedback.
yeah,
We're discussing this internally. That really goes a long way. Like drivers really want to hear that from their team.
yeah.
And, sometimes things get put in place because of that.
Yeah, and
But not
there's
long.
a
Yeah.
coaching piece too. I think it's hard. The educational side can be hard.
Yes.
And I think historically, companies want to educate the driver, and there's two sides to that education. So I think just listening and understanding, is different. It's a different approach. In this industry, again, it's generally, hey, I need you to deliver X, Y, and Z on time, and if you don't, you're in trouble. Well, there's somebody you're talking to and you're saying that to, and it does get lost, I think, at times.
Hmm.
So I think for us, I mean, even just our sizes on, I guess I would say the amount of drivers we have, with fleet managers is what we call them here, is you try and keep it a manageable number so those relationships can be built, and I would say fostered and nurtured. So
Yeah. Foster nurture, we're talking about like soft core values, which
yeah,
appreciate
yes,
in the long run, that's what other industries are doing, right?
yeah,
That's what
yes,
keeps
they
them
are.
successful, that's what keeps them thriving. And so the way we've been doing things got us so far, but there's a different component that needs to be added into the layer. And with this market now, this is the opportunity, right?
Yeah,
It's coming again. It's going to be 8 days a week, right? Let's just
yeah,
say that. So And I'd be curious, you've been in the industry now for how many years have you been in the industry, Michael?
12 sounds.
12 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty
Yes.
cool.
Yeah,
12.
I weirdly have you beat. I'm at 16. I don't know how.
That's okay.
I'm like 10 years younger. I don't understand. No, I'm kidding. But, from where you sit, what do you think some of the reasons are behind our industry having such high turnover? And
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for a long time it was truly, I think companies in the 90s and into the 2000s, there was a growth component there. I think a lot of companies had the ability to grow, and they made enough, I would say, enough on their margins and money to just essentially pay for the growth and deal with the turnover. And that has narrowed, I think, too, which is good. But I mean, I think about it every day. To me, it just seems like a lot of companies turned into kind of some of your, I would say, I don't want to call it a driver mill, but that's kind of what some of them have turned into, and it pushes. I think what's hard is they're not always viewing the relationship the way it should be, right? So it's a lot easier to just let the person leave and not maybe fix a situation that's a little more difficult and keep them. And that in the industry you can see is a pretty normal thing. And you will have that in every industry, but I think the investment in the people wasn't there as much as it was maybe in other things that companies wanted to do. I think the industry turnover has decreased, and it is cyclical. Like you do see those times where it dips for everybody and the times where it jumps for everybody. And that's affected also by the market too. So hopefully, I think a lot of your carriers now, I think, are emphasizing turnover more. I do think it was hard at one point in time to really put a number on what the true costs were. Even this day and age, you can go to an event and people ask you what's it cost for you to hire a truck driver? Was that, and they give you a number, right?
yeah,
Or they want your number, and it's what does that number really entail?
yeah.
Is it recruiting? Is it the onboarding costs? What are those costs?
Staff, or is it just media spend, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with turnover, and I think it was hard to quantify that for a lot of years. But now I think it's changed. I mean, obviously with statistical analysis over the last 20 years, it's a lot different, and companies have been more prepared and execute a lot at a higher level too. So
I know when I got into this industry, the focus was just recruiting,
yeah,
butts and seats, right?
yep,
And KJ was born, and our goal was to not only look at the butts and seats, getting more folks to the companies and the
yes,
companies that are hiring, but retaining them, right? I've noticed a complete difference in the industry adopting that now, where
yeah,
they're really looking at the retention more so than, I mean, obviously still recruiting, but that was such a high focus
yeah,
during certain time frames. Where if they really look at their retention, that can alleviate a lot of the media spend. Even as a marketing agency,
yeah,
that you're you're spending on, because cost per hire is only going to go up, right? Inflation is
yes,
going up. There's that's kind of the nature of the game. But if you really focus on retention, as best to your ability,
yeah.
that's a driving factor, right? And that
It is.
across
And
everything.
I mean, you can see it too. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that just strictly now deal with retention and helping,
Yeah.
clients keep their drivers. And it's a unique industry, and I think it'll continue to grow. But it is something that, 10 years ago wasn't common and really didn't exist. Now it's something that most companies are all utilizing to some capacity at some level. And there's a cost involved with that, but the cost is still cheaper than the turnover. So it
Yeah.
makes sense financially.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
recognition. I mean, that goes in hand with keeping the drivers, happy,
Yeah.
safe, not really looking at the company next door. What are
Yeah.
some of the best practices that you've found to build that sense of community amongst employees that are, especially in industry where we spend significant time, they spend significant time.
Yes.
What have you found to be, some good?
Yeah. I think it always starts kind of with the one-on-one recognition. So I think
Yeah.
between your fleet managers and your people that are working every day with the drivers is just kind of the one-on-one. I think it's the most important, and probably for some drivers A lot of their motivation is kind of from that intrinsic one-on-one. We use a lot of different techniques, right? We obviously we have awards that we give out yearly. We have different categories that are applied to those. So, a new driver can win and a tenured driver can win, right? And a lot of companies have those. But I really just think for us, it's kind of concentrated on the one-on-one, and we're always gonna do the yearly awards and make sure people are recognized. But a simple example is if you have a driver that maneuvers through a difficult situation, and you're aware of the situation, just bringing that to their attention, where hey, this is what you prevented. And I don't think a lot of companies use that data like they should, because the driver's there by himself thinking, wow, that could have been really bad, and he may not even realize like how well he really did, and what he saved you until you bring it to him. So we use that. We have obviously a driver council, driver of the year awards and those things as well. But we're able to use an internal, I would call it like a feedback platform too, where drivers can give us positive feedback, negative feedback, neutral feedback. And it's nice to be able to use that at a management level, but also at a driver manager level where they can go to the driver with, hey, this is what I was told, thank you. So there's a couple different ways, and everybody has their own secret formula to that, but recognition is key. So
It is key, and it goes beyond driver appreciation week. I always say that.
yes,
Right? We have a beautiful week every year, but that's where I really notice a shift in a lot of trucking companies across the board. Is more that how do we celebrate the wins, and how do we then talk about maybe some of the losses, or
yeah,
where there's opportunity to improve as a company. And I think having that overall feedback loop is absolutely critical
yeah.
across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we're fortunate. I think with our size and just the management, it wants to be involved. I think it is the key. Where it's again, everybody's different with that. But for us, like back to our mission statement, we understand what we're doing and who's helping to deliver. And that's something that I think gets lost. So for us, it's first and foremost, it's on the wall for a reason. And
Is it? I didn't know that. I
it's, I
loved
mean,
it. That's why I had to
it's
highlight
talked
it.
about for a reason because that's what's
Yes.
important. And it's ingrained in, I would say, our culture.
Yes.
It's something that we've strengthened over the years and something you can continue to build on. But if it's not part of the foundation, generally building is hard. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely love it because it simply says, how large the industry is and how much touch point, how much impact we have, which is often forgotten about on a day-to-day basis. As we're starting to wrap up here, I'd love to ask you, what would you say is probably one of the more important lessons you've learned in your career around the context of 3Rs? I know it's a big question. And
yeah, so man, I would say just having a positive attitude, truthfully. I think the ups and downs, this is a very cyclical industry. And I truly feel like that helps drive a lot. And I think it's the same all the way, from whether you're in safety or recruiting or logistics, or whether you're a driver. I think that attitude goes a long way. Because it is easy, especially if you're a driver, if you're dealing with a tough situation. You're in a truck by yourself, right? For 14 hours and 24 hours. So I think attitude's key, and in our situation too in the office, it's the same thing. It's I think coming in with a positive attitude and just working with people will just help drive results. And when you have a team that does that, and I'm fortunate to, it makes my life a lot easier. And they do all the heavy lifting, and I give them all the love and praise because they do a great job. So.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things around the soft skills, which I absolutely love and want to re-highlight. So, empathy, honesty, building that relationship, listening, understanding, and having a positive outlook. Those are all critical components as we look at success in our industry. Whether you're a new CDL driver or been a driver for 10 years, or may have been promoted internally to work in dispatch or recruiting, that type of outlook and really focusing on those soft skills are really going to set you apart in the long run, because when it comes down to it, it's a relationship industry, right?
Yes.
It's very much, I always call it, transportation is like 2 degrees of separation. If we don't
Yeah.
know each other, we probably know someone that we have in common.
You do. Yeah. Yeah.
Large it is small, right? And that's
It
really
is.
why I love it.
And I think,
Go ahead.
no, yeah, I was going to say, I think the unique thing about all those that you listed is they're controllable, right? And that's one
Yes,
thing that
yes.
I find in this industry, there's plenty you can't control. If you can work well with the things you can control and maximize those things, generally the other items will work themselves out.
That's a very good point, and that's something that should be improved upon.
Yeah,
It changes as you
it does.
evolve, and what you're doing evolves. Something that you
Yep.
can control. I, I love that. Michael, we have a driver network that likes to tune in, and
Yeah, that's awesome.
would love to hear directly from you why a driver should consider a career at Bay and Bay.
Yeah, I mean it's simple if you're looking for what I would say is a family culture that is truly quality driven tradition. That's what we do. For us, again, it's about the driver, it's about the customer. We're all pieces in making that happen, but that's the most important pieces, and we don't forget that. So, I mean, for us, if you're looking for a home, a place to expand in your career or not quite start your career, you do need experience. Give us a call. But I mean, we have plenty of options, and I think the big thing is the growth opportunity. We've had drivers that have started out as a company driver, moved into a contractor, independent contractor, moved all the way into a master contractor. And in this industry, that happens. It's not common, and it's very unique. So
So that's fantastic. And to all the drivers, the link to Bay and Bay website will be in the show notes below, as well as their career website. We'll also have a link to Michael LinkedIn page, so you can get in
well,
contact with him as well.
don't have
He's
to
a
do
little
that.
viral.
No.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael, for coming on the show and really
Yeah,
sharing
thank
your
you.
insights and learning more about Bay and Bay and what's going well, and where the current market is today. So thank you so much for being on
Yeah,
today.
thank you for having me, and I look forward to more of your podcasts as well. I appreciate it, Jackie.
Yes, yes, and thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. Remember, the road to success begins with effective recruitment, thoughtful retention, and genuine recognition. Feel free to share this knowledge with your peers, industry colleagues. Your sharing can make a difference, and together we can empower the industry to thrive. Until next time.
Thank you.